Welcome back to the Modern Recruiter Podcast. I'm Shannon Castleman, Senior Manager of Talent Acquisition here at Greenhouse Software. And today we're talking about something that I don't really think gets enough credit, how your ATS itself can be a competitive advantage in attracting talent, not just a back-end tool for managing it. My guest today is Mary Catherine Wolfe, Director of TA for the Americas at Morningstar. Mary Catherine, hi, thanks for being here.
Hey, Shannon. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to talk with you today.
And before we dive in, for anyone who doesn't know you or Morningstar, would love just to hear a little bit more about your business and what TA looks like at your company.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm Mary Catherine, as Shannon mentioned. Most people call me MC, and I lead TA at Morningstar for the Americas. And Morningstar, for those of you that don't know, is a leading financial services firm that provides investment strategy, market and data research, portfolio management. It's famous for its star ratings of stocks and economic moat analysis. You know, what a lot of people are experiencing right now as TA is that it's evolving very quickly, moving from what has been a pre-AI era to the new era of using AI becoming more sophisticated. So I would say TA looks like it is in transition right now.
Yeah. Yep, that's for sure. Well, great. So let's dive into our first topic. I actually want to start with a hot take. And that take is that candidate experience is the new employer brand. And I think especially in a remote or a distributed workforce where a candidate can't actually get an impression of the company by walking into a physical office and feeling the culture. Instead, your employer brand and perception really gets formed from how well designed your interview process is, how fast you are at communication, how transparent, your process is, and how organized your team comes across. And of course, your ATS is sort of like that operational layer beneath the surface of that candidate experience. So I'm curious, does that resonate with you? And how are you seeing that play out?
Oh, absolutely. I think candidate experience is employer brand. Essentially, brands, I guess, can be, it's so much more than pictures, colors, testimonials, how to navigate a website, an EVP. It's really the lived experience of the people that are going through the process every single day. And all of those touch points, make your employer brand. It can make it or break it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question for you. Speaking of employer brand, that's a little bit of a segue outside of candidate experience. What are your current thoughts on pages like Glassdoor for companies and other types of like online pages? I know it's even a hot topic for our team where we've had different types of strategies around it of like, do you respond to every review, every comment? Are candidates even still looking at it? Like, do you think that's an area that TA people should still be investing in?
I mean, I think take Glassdoor with a grain of salt. To me, it's like Yelp, right? I read restaurant reviews on Yelp all the time, and I still make my own decisions. And I think
Mhm.
Glassdoor has been really, really just muddied and watered down. It's become a platform for people to just really complain more than anything. I think that if you're really going to try to measure what you're doing in the candidate experience, it's about serving people when they're in it, right when they're done, using that data, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it to really form your opinion versus
Mhm.
going to that third party like Glassdoor.
Yeah. And I think too, now more than ever, where TA teams are leaner than they've ever been, you do have to sort of prioritize and pick and choose where you're spending your time and your battles. And I think this is even a great example where like maybe it does make more sense to lean more into your candidate experience and your operational layer and your ATS, which could have a bigger
Mhm.
impact on the candidate than your Glassdoor reviews.
Oh, 100%. I think about, even with Greenhouse, right? Every candidate that makes it past recruiter screen is receiving a survey, and we get really good, like what you think what you think you should be solving isn't always what you should be solving. And so getting that actual feedback where you can have these real-time interventions with what's going on with your interview process, I would say is how you truly improve your employer brand and do it at scale.
Yeah, definitely. So another take around candidate experience is The reality is anywhere from like 96 to 99% of candidates who apply to a job are ultimately getting rejected, right? Only one person is getting the job. So the majority of the candidates and their candidate experience is going to be that of rejection. And it's extremely important, like how you're handling your process for those candidates that aren't actually getting the offer as well. I actually pulled some data from the talent board that I thought would be interesting for this conversation to share with you. So 90% of candidates say they would refer others to a company's open roles based on a positive hiring experience. 85% of job seekers say a positive rejection experience makes them more likely to apply for a future role. And then 65% of rejected candidates who had a great candidate experience report they will continue to purchase products or do business with the organization despite being rejected. So curious, like what if you have any thoughts or stories or takes that align with some of that data?
Oh, I mean, I'm not surprised by it at all. At the end of the day, everybody knows there's one job, right? And there's a lot of applicants. I mean, people aren't, thinking that they're going to get every job they apply for. But at the end of the day, they are humans going through this. And probably when you're looking for a job, you're in some sort of transition, either by choice or not by choice or whatever it is. And the way that you're treated is really important. And it says a lot about the company. And so I think, being open, being transparent, I know we call everybody that, if they've made it to on-site and we're going to reject and they've invested time with us, we'll give them, send them a note saying like, hey, do you want to talk through things, get some high level feedback and, really offer our services to make it a more human process.
I'd love to hear more about that because I do think one of the big levers for a strong candidate experience is feedback. And I also think with the amount of applications recruiters are now receiving, I think with the amount of work now on recruiters' plates with having leaner teams and expected to do more with less, that creating and constructing a very constructive feedback at scale can be difficult. So tell me a little bit more about like your team's strategy around like when and where and how to deliver feedback in a scalable way.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I, but prior to Morningstar, I was the head of TA globally for one of their subsidiary companies called PitchBook, right? And so this is really where we saw this come to light while I was at PitchBook. But we used, how do we operationalize it? We used the automated emails in Greenhouse, right? And to be able at like the point of rejection, send an automated email that said like, hey, we have some feedback to get on, the status of your application and your interviews. If interested, please schedule time, right, to hear it and all of that. So we would, schedule with them and have it going and then talk to them and just say, like, hey, unfortunately you weren't selected. Here's it, in some cases there wasn't really good feedback to give. And it was more, hey, we just decided to go a different direction with another candidate. In other situations, especially in more entry level roles, you can act as a coach a little bit more and give some high level. I mean, obviously, you don't want to dig down into any, super detailed stuff, but enough for the
Your
candidate.
legal team doesn't want you to do that, right?
No, no, exactly. But enough for the person to walk away and say, hey, that like I can use this in my next interview. I have this amazing example, kind of like when we were talking about Glassdoor earlier, of people really going there to complain. Well, I had this recruiter at Pitchback, and he was the best rejecter I have ever heard. And I looked at him across the table one day and I said, oh my God, Mark, if I am ever getting rejected from a role, I sure hope it's you on the other end doing it. And he got a post that named him and named Pitchbook on LinkedIn from a woman that did not get the job and talked about what a class act the company was and how
Mm.
she would recommend us to anybody. I mean, I got teary when I read it. It was so amazing.
That's so great. I do think like your actions when things are tough or with negative situations like that actually tend to speak more higher volume than,
Hmm.
when things are going well or easy or positive things for either your employees or candidates. We actually have a similar story. There's two actually experiences that come to mind where we did have to ultimately reject very strong candidates, very strong finalists, where ultimately it was just a very competitive pool. We had to go in a different direction, but we're able to do so in a way that they felt really good about it and very clear and tuned into the why, uh, that both candidates ended up, of course, still being customers of Greenhouse and also offer to sit on like panels and do thought leadership and different things for us, which I think is really nice and speaks volumes. A, to how the feedback was delivered, but also B, like to their level of maturity and respect for like a structured and clear hiring and feedback loop.
Absolutely. I think it's so important. I have been watching my husband go through the interview process now. We just moved cities and there's a lot to be desired out there. So,
Yeah, yeah. We talked a lot about feedback. What else do you feel like are some magic levers to creating a super positive candidate experience?
I mean, I think it's just removing the barriers, right? Making sure they have information that they need to prepare for the interviews, making sure that the interviewers aren't asking the same question in every single interview, making sure interviewers are on time. That I will
Yeah.
say when we do the candidate surveys, and that's the number one thing that they will say that why they didn't have a good experience is somebody so and so showed up 5 minutes late and they're like, I'm giving my time. Why isn't my time important enough? And I mean, that's very easily solvable, right? And so I think it's just the little things. Like, little things matter and they add up. And if you can execute on those, then it's going to be a good experience, right?
Yeah, it's reminding folks of the interview team that you're playing host in a way, albeit virtually. Like it's like hosting, it's etiquette, it's
Yeah.
manners, it's being on time, it's showing courtesy and respect to the person going through the process.
Absolutely. And like to prepare, right? Have read the resume beforehand, have looked at your interview questions, you know, be thoughtful. There's different skill level, right? And ability when it comes to interviewing. And I think the more novice interviewers tend to be more scripted, but there is a way to do behavioral interviewing and to ask structured questions and create an environment that flows and is natural and allows the candidate to talk about what they want to talk about.
Exactly. I think the other thing too is like speed and transparency in your
Mhm.
process. I see a lot of candidates, on different forums or just in general, even have heard experiences anecdotally, maybe like you mentioned your husband looking for different jobs where, not really having a peek behind the curtain as to like what's going on or why there's a delay in the process or uh, why interviews might be taking a long time to schedule or, taking a long time to hear back. So what are maybe like strategies or tactics that you all have used to maintain speed and transparency throughout your processes?
Yeah, I mean, I think at PitchBook, it was really important where we had SLAs, right? So, and similar to what you're describing with your team over there at Greenhouse, obviously we can't give feedback on applicants and recruiter screens. It's just such a high volume. But we're going to get back to somebody review your application within 48 hours. And you're going to hear from us within 24 hours of finishing any part of the process. Right. And then we've all been in situations where maybe you're the first person that's going through an interview loop and they have a few other people and it's going to take a couple of weeks to get that done. Telling the person up front, "Hey, like, you're the first person in. This is gonna take a couple of weeks to play out. So, I will keep in touch with you if anything on your end changes, if you're moving further in a process in a different organization, please tell me." It's really building that relationship and being honest with them.
Yeah, I think exactly like you mentioned, transparency is key. Like I actually usually do a joke. I'm like, "Hey, I have good news and bad news. Good news is that you're on time in the process. You're actually early. You're not too late. We haven't made hiring decisions. Bad news is that means sometimes you can experience some more delays until we've completed like this entire stage of candidates to be able to be where you are, which is like have finished this stage in the process. And so please bear with us. That means there might be some delays. But even them knowing the mechanics, like the peek behind the curtain of Oz, of like, oh,
Yeah.
that's why. Okay, great. I feel good. It's not because I bombed that interview or whatnot.
And if you're going to if it's an interview that you know is not gonna move forward, it's not a good fit, then let them know, like, "Hey, we're gonna remove you from the slate, like, you're not gonna be considered at the end, blah, blah, blah." Give the feedback at that point.
Uh-huh.
Don't leave them hanging, right? Talking about my husband, he made it to the end of a process and he kept asking me, he's like, "Well, they're not calling me, they're not telling me anything." And I said, "They have somebody better that they like more and they want to see that person through. And then they're going to get back to you as a backup or they're going to send you like a note at the very end." And like, sure enough, like 4 weeks later, got like a really generic note. And I was like,
Hmm.
oof, they could have done
Hmm.
better. So,
Yeah. And I feel like that's That's a great area for recruiters to strategically partner with hiring managers where like we've all been there where there's a hiring manager. It's like, oh, I'm just going to put this person on ice, like just in case, or like until I've seen a few more. And it's like, okay, if you're not immediately like this person checks all of the competencies that we have in our scorecard and we're a strong yes and we're moving them forward, then you need to just let them go and like be
Yes.
respectful of their time versus just keeping them until you find another person who arguably hits the competencies better. So let's segue the conversation into ATS talk. So, a lot of the things we're talking about, right? With a positive candidate experience and speed, feedback, transparency in the process, organization and structure, being on time to interviews, like all these things. Like, what are ways that we feel like the ATS can help solve for some of these gaps or solutions, or even how is your team utilizing your ATS to be able to solve for some of these aspects of candidate experience?
I mean, I think, anything that you can do in, the speed and transparency realm, automated, updates when you can, templatize things to make things easier, put in SLAs. I think, what's not measured can't be managed. And so if you're measuring things, then you can find where maybe, hey, this is taking longer than it should. Like maybe we're not using our ATS the correct way. Maybe there's a different, technology can help us. So really measure your process. I would say that the candidate feedback that automated is really nice because it helps you pinpoint some things. Self-scheduling, I think is
Mm.
really, really key. Making scheduling easy for coordinators because scheduling can be complex, right? And so I think really getting that figured out, the ATS could support that.
Yeah, self-scheduling is huge. We're big fans of that. I feel like that's actually where a lot of the time gets taken up of
Yes.
like, "Oh, I just saw your email today and now I'm giving you my availability." And then it's like, "Oh, this availability doesn't work for us. What about this?" And that can take days just to
Days.
get the interview scheduled versus like, "Here, go ahead and schedule it for a time that works for you." And the other thing too is that some of this is even just like having a good ATS where it's good tools for your recruiters that frees up
Yes.
some of their administrative burdens that they can even just lean in and have more of the human relationship with candidates to free up their time, I think is
Oh,
important as
yeah.
well.
I think candidates in general are very interested in what companies are using in their tech stack. The technology and the access you give your employees says a lot about who you are as an employer. And if you are not giving people access to good technology to do their jobs, you might be running dated things, and that could be a symptom of a bigger issue.
That's huge.
Yeah.
And I agree, especially in this age of AI, which is what you kicked us
Yes.
off with. It's like, is your company someone that's going to give you access? And I know that there's different levels of risk and what security teams and legal teams are comfortable with, but like, are you giving your employees tools to be successful and to do their job well and at scale and like take it to the next level? And that includes your recruiting teams as far as what tech and systems that you're giving them access to.
Oh, absolutely. People want to be successful in what they do. And if you're running lean teams, for obvious reasons, and you don't give people the tools they need to be successful, it results in not good processes. And then that hurts employer brand. It's the whole thing is cyclical. Then you don't get the top talent in. And then, you're kind of on a path to mediocrity.
Let's talk about structured hiring. So, we all know structured hiring is like a foundational concept here at Greenhouse. I've seen that you've shared some sentiments publicly as well around the same. However, there are potentially some earlier stage companies or folks listening, like or certain industries that might not be as familiar with the concept. And I also think, just like recruiting teams, it is a concept that has evolved over time. Like what structured hiring used to be may not be how it is today. So I'm curious, like, what your definition is and your take on it today looks like.
It's funny. I was just having a conversation with one of my recruiters about this earlier. At the end of the day, our job is to hire the best person for the position. So, what kind of interview process and hiring process is going to get you that result? You got to ask good questions. You got to ask questions around values, aligning with the company, all of that stuff. And you have a very limited time to do all these things. So, how are you going to get the information you need, give the candidate the space to provide the information to evaluate you and, you evaluate them? And how are you going to do that quickly? Right. And so I think the structured hiring, at least for me, is a framework, right? It's a framework of like, hey, here's some questions. Here's the order. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's who does what. Like, it's like an orchestrator, right? And it's like getting everybody on the team on the field and the structure is kind of the quarterback, right? And so you can get through it and then you can make your decisions. So I think that like maybe in the older days, structured hiring was like HR needs us to do this and ask every single question and check these box. Like, no, it's a framework to get you what you need. And what you need is that right hire for your organization.
And I think your scorecard or your attributes list is really just that North Star. Like when
Yes.
everyone gets lost in the hubbub or there's too many opinions or someone goes down a tangent and you're full circle and it's like brings you back to that truth, which is like, this is what we need and it's defensible. It helps
Hmm.
you craft feedback for candidates. It helps to make
Yeah.
sure that you're aligned. We used to be very prescriptive here at Greenhouse, where not only, of course, were there the set attributes, but we were defining the exact number and the exact wording of every question at every stage in the process. And I will say that's maybe a new shift for us a little bit with like this next evolution of structured hiring, just with increase of candidate fraud and candidates using AI. It's like very easy to gain like star method perfect type
Yeah.
answers. And so we're trying to lean more into like, we want our interviewers and our teams to feel like they have a really solid foundation and knowledge and skill set of like, what can you not ask in interviews? Like what's illegal to ask, what you can, what a good question on our probing looks like giving them the skills in the structure there to then give them the freedom where if they want to introduce a new question to like probe a little deeper,
Yeah.
as long as it's still tied to the attribute they're assessing for, that they can. And that's kind of our next evolution of it.
100%. And that's exactly what I think. It's the framework, right?
Hmm.
And there's guardrails in that framework. There's how you do it, but then it gives you the flexibility to kind of move and cover when you need to, right? Like
Yeah.
I think there has to be
Yeah.
flexibility built in.
Well, because at the end of the day, it's all about what gives you the best signal. And so if you're asking certain questions, but you're just not getting the signal that you need, like instead of just going
Yes.
on to the next question, being able to ask that follow up or that probing or that
That's
next thing to make sure you're getting good signal, I think is at the core.
100%.
Yeah. So, what do you say to people who might push back or say that like structured hiring slows us down?
Oh gosh. I mean, I've had some very rogue hiring teams and managers in my life. And, there's a saying that is, and I think it's a Navy SEAL saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So if you can explain to somebody when you're all over the place and you're scattered and like, the left hand doesn't know what the right's doing, everyone's doing something a little bit different, it's fragmented, that creates some chaos and some noise where you can't get to those signals fast enough. And so you put a structure or a framework or whatever you want to call it in place to enable you to move quick. And you tell them, like, hey, like, this is how we move quick. This is how we're nimble. Like, we follow this framework or this, process, this structure, and that's going to help us. Right. So it might take a little bit of time setting it up in our intake meeting, to align on all this, but once that alignment happens, you can move.
Hmm. I love a Navy SEAL quote. That's awesome. I was going to share a similar quote, not a Navy SEAL, but my boss, our VP of Talent Planning and Acquisition, now Transformation, Ariana Moon. She told me rules aren't restrictions, but structure for greater freedom. So it's like actually don't think of rules or structured hiring as restraint. It actually gives you the guardrails to like be creative and be free because you know
Yes.
what you're doing.
Yes.
Um,
I love that. I'm going to steal that quote.
yeah.
I love that. So I
Great.
agree with that. Like, yeah, like know what your guardrails are because then you can avoid things that are going to make you collapse,
Mhm.
take you down a bad path and you do get more freedom.
Mhm. Absolutely. So I want to hear about your company's journey specifically because I do think you mentioned a few different examples of doing this very thoughtfully. So tell me a little bit more about what you were maybe trying to solve for when you decided to make a change within your current role or past role.
Yeah. And I'll give an example at Pitchback again, just because was there for so long. But we had an older ATS when I started. There wasn't a lot of process in place. First things first, like teaching people how to source, getting recs approved and out of email, getting job offers automated, very low hanging fruit. Got that solved. And then we really started dialing into candidate experience and quality, right? And like, how do you ask good questions? How do you stand up good interview training? How do you do all of those things? And so that was the journey. And so in the 7 years, I just left a few months ago to work for the parent company. But in those 7 years, we went from kind of a scrappy little wild, wild west team to, I would say, a state of the art recruiting team.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned obviously ATS. Who did you ultimately end up going with?
I don't know. I went with Greenhouse. To be fair, I think I've implemented Greenhouse at 2 or 3 companies, so a big fan.
Yeah, of course I'm biased. I work here. I have to ask you, like, what do you think made Greenhouse the right fit for your company or organization at those periods of time?
I think Greenhouse is really, really good at providing that structure, framework, that gives teams the ability to fly, right? You put it in place, you can execute things very easily. I think it's a very easy system to configure. And I mean, there's not a lot of barriers there. There's no perfect system. I don't want to, sound Pollyanna or anything, but Greenhouse just does a really remarkable job.
Okay, MC, last question. If someone's listening to this and thinking, okay, I want to start making more improvements to our candidate experience here at our company, where would you tell them to start?
I would start with mapping out the candidate journey, right? So map out your candidate journey or your hiring process, figure out where all the touch points need to be. So if it's you get to phone screen, oh, okay, we want to send an automated message giving them instructions. And then 24 hours after the phone screen, we want a thank you note or whatever those is, map that out so you truly understand start to finish what that looks like, and then start configuring your system to support that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think even like applying as a candidate, like going through the full
Yeah.
journey yourself as like a dummy candidate and seeing what's on the receiving end is a great exercise to do.
I mean, absolutely, and when you really sit down and do a journey mapping exercise, it's pretty powerful.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. This was so good. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Yes.
And, obviously, you can't control the job market. You can't always move on compensation, but you can control how you treat people when they raise their hand and they say, I'm interested in your company or your opportunity. And so, if you want a framework for thinking through whether your ETS is actually set up to support that, Greenhouse did just put out an updated 2026 ATS buyer's guide that's very useful. It's not a sales doc, it's a practical framework for evaluating what you actually need, and the link is in the show notes. So, thank you so much for watching The Modern Recruiter. Hit subscribe, share this with someone on your team who needs to hear it, and we'll see you next time.